So we're lucky to have him. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Theo. Okay, so morning everyone, thanks for coming. The minimalist composer Philip Glass, have you ever heard of this person? Okay, not famous for lyrics actually, because he's minimalist and it's music only. But he came out with this quote that music is the most elegant language. And we'll look at this today as we go on. I think that song lyrics are often, but not necessarily always, examples of eloquent language in use. So the breakdown of what we're going to do today in this hour of a workshop is the talk's going to be about 20 minutes or so. Then there's going to be some group work where you're going to get to work with some other people on some songs that I've got arranged here for you. Then we're going to have feedback on what you would do with those songs. Please welcome, come in, take a seat. Then we're going to sort of conclude, tie together, and I'll show you some things that I'm doing. I'll invite you to take part in some of those things that I'm doing. So I think it's the perfect workshop, really, because I don't get to do much and you get to do everything, so it takes the stress away. But I will start, as I said, with some background and theory to enable you to help you to do what's going to happen a bit later. I believe that it's a very interesting, song lyrics are a very interesting text guide because they're just so varied. There's so many things that you can do with song lyrics, and it's, for some reason or another, it's not really looked into in sufficient detail. The songs that I've got for you aren't necessarily, they're not at all my 8 most favourite songs. They're just songs that I think might be quite interesting for people to try out and see what they can do with. Yeah, I'll let other people come in here. So don't worry, you haven't missed anything. It's just a load of intro blah. That's all we've had so far. Before we get to the end, there's some seats at the front and some over in the corner as well. Great, good to have a packed room. Welcome. The more the merrier. So as I've put there, I'm going to use you for inspiration. So as I said, I think in the brochure, and I don't know if you watched the little video clip while I was doing something, I'm going to be asking for you to use your ideas, and that's really where the ideas are going to come from in this session. In terms of what we're going to do today in a little bit more detail, now there's more people in here, I'm going to start by looking at reasons why. I'm going to try and convince you, if you don't already think this, that songs and song lyrics are important, they're usable, and they're desirable in EFL language teaching with all sorts of age groups and all sorts of levels. Going to look at some of the things that can be done with them and how they can be used in more creative ways than perhaps they are, certainly in things like textbooks, that I think are really poor in their use of them. Then I said I'm going to ask you to come up, based on kind of a cryptic analysis of what the song is, I'm going to get you into groups to come up and select one based on the cryptic title. You're going to discuss it with each other and then kind of feedback. Yeah. I think that song lyrics are very powerful and very usable. I think possibly because they're a place where sound and word and mood meet together. Although, depending on the song lyrics can be fairly meaningless, especially if you don't know the music. That is the case with some and not with others, I think. But the way that they work, I think, and then their powerfulness, is the way that the words and the meaning and the delivery all fuse together. And you may believe this or not, but I believe that poetry is something that's best brought to life. Performance poetry is something I like. And I think that song lyrics in many ways, when performed as songs, are the ultimate performance poetry. Right, there's a question that comes up about should you pick songs? Some people say you should pick songs that are very, very, very clear, and you shouldn't pick songs that aren't very clear. It would depend on the level a little bit, but I think that what you're doing basically there is something that isn't very realistic, it's not very authentic. Yeah, if you're deliberately taking lyrics that are easy to understand. We wouldn't normally do that. We would normally stretch and challenge our students. And if you're talking about listening, as we are, to try and work out what someone is saying, then surely you need to replicate what happens in the real world when you're listening to people having conversations, when you can't work things out. So I would sort of go against that, really. I think that actually indecipherable song lyrics can be incredibly interesting because you can write into them what's there or what you think might be there. So you have artists that you may or may not have heard of, sort of early REM, where it's kind of like mumbling and different kind of patterns of sounds that could be virtually anything, whatever you want it to be. Or artists like the Cocktail Twins, if you've heard of them, the singer Liz Fraser. I think that obscure lyrics can be interesting. A very obvious example is from the sort of hippie classic, the Eagles' Hotel California, with this kind of oxymoronic, I'm sure that's not a word, oxymoron statement. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. And you can make something out of that, I think, and that could be a discussion point, for example. So, the fact they're indecipherable, the fact they're obscure, I would say is something to use, rather than go all the time with the simple options. And I think that some of the best song lyrics, really, when you're discussing a theme and possibly the language therein, are ones that are open to a certain amount of interpretation. So some songs have double meanings. So I don't know if you know the Stranglers' Golden Brown. Does anyone know that? With my mind she runs, and this kind of thing. So on the surface it might be some kind of paean to the singer's dark-haired or dark-eyed girlfriend. But other people, of course, have said it's a kind of ode to heroin and the effect that it has on the addict. And then you've got, for example, there are lots of examples here, the Beatles' Happiness is a Warm Gun, which some people say might even have a triple meaning. Just check the meanings here. So one of the first sort of meanings being perhaps it's something to do with killing sprees, times of Charles Manson and suicide and all this kind of thing. Also, there is a drug reference, possibly a warm gun being a needle, or the actual reference that I think John Lennon gave, which said that it was an ode to a contented penis and a decent orgasm. With bang bang shoot shoot. Okay, so going on to what theorists have said about the use of some lyrics. Some fairly obvious quotes coming up, but also some more interesting ones. It's generally agreed that song lyrics can be fun to do with a class. And that can be very motivating as well. Also the size, I think, of song lyrics generally is they're quite a small text type. So you can go into kind of depth, the more micro-analysis than you might do with a larger text. Handlin in 1992 said that songs can bridge gaps between a formal and an informal learning environment. So in other words, it allows the level of formality to drop off a bit, I think. And certain features like the use of slang would come in there, the use of connected speech, and all these kind of things. Keskin said that it helps with stimulating and facilitating learning. And also more that it can help learners' attention assist them with more on-task behaviour than some other text types. There's no doubt, I think, that it's very authentic. There's a big debate about what authenticity really is it anything at all? But insofar as we agree that some things are more authentic than others. Because, a lot of song lyrics have everyday colloquial language at their core. And it could be something worth the student, especially if a student is going to live in another country where they need to know some of that language, at least receptively, if not productively. Ben Lewis calls the picking up of words and phrases language hacking. And that really is, I think, something that's going on there. So as I touched on before, songs have a variety of different accents in them, British songs, American songs, or whatever they are. And it's a very good way, I think, to perhaps get used to listening to how the locals, whatever the locals are, speak, and perhaps, if that's what you want to do, trying to replicate that. Obviously, the repetition of repeating a song lyric, the more you repeat it, the more you're likely to sound like the singer. There's me doing my Bobby Womack impersonations, and very cringeworthy they are too. They can certainly act as a kind of way into a culture. Not just from the accents, but the topics that are discussed. And very much, they are very much of their time, although I tend to find that the majority of good song lyrics are timeless. That's what I would argue. And the ones I've chosen there go from one that was done about a few months ago to one that was done maybe 50 years ago. So there's quite a lot of variety there. So you've also got a situation where you can sort of break down and have a look at grammar in situ. So in a very natural sense, so not the kind of breakdown that you might have in a textbook of how grammar is, but more like how it's actually used in the normal world, as it were. Wassink has said that there are certain characteristics of song lyrics that make them easy to work with. So here, he's almost certainly talking about things like the fact that a lot of song lyrics are repetitive, which is perhaps a very good thing. The length is usually relatively short, although I've deliberately chosen some that vary in length. The use of rhyme, often very simple rhyme schemes, or not, the choice not to do it like that. And this is a very interesting quote, I think, from Jolly here, that I'll read out to you. Language teachers may be missing a great deal by not exploiting songs and other rhythmic language compositions as classroom teaching aids. The close relationship between language and music is an easily recognisable one. I quote back from way back in the day, what's that, about 45 years ago. But I still think this is applicable nowadays. So what can you do with a song? I would suggest it's more a case of what can't you do with a song. So really this is a very basic list, which I'm sure you could add to, and you think, oh, he's missed out this and he's missed out this, and it could be that. Starting off with the very simple, what we learned yesterday with Rebecca was called a top-down analysis, analysing the title. Prediction activities. This is the title. What do you expect it to be about? It doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. Does it really? And the fact that the title is obscure. I mean, we were doing yesterday with Michael. We were doing the ship song, and we were kind of trying to work out Nick Cave's The Ship Song, how that actually tied in, and it's guesswork, really. It's something that the writers decided to put in there. Pre-listening. So you could focus on particular sort of chunking area of vocabulary, and words that you would expect to come out, given the title, or what you think it might be about. So if you've got one that's on the theme of the sea, there could be worth inputting. Well, you will know what you're doing anyway, but you can input some words for them there. Grammar work for things that come up in the song, just to make sure that they're able to cope with that, especially if it's something they've not already done at their level. And I just think it just varies so much. This is the one thing I would say is just don't stick to a formula. Take an individual song as a text type and look at it, read it, listen to it, and then from there, don't say, right, I'm going to do a gapful. Go through a stage of what could be done with this? Why is this different from another song? What might be a good emphasis? And that's what you're going to be doing later. So I'm going to be nicking your ideas when you come out with all those brilliant ideas. And obviously, it sounds almost too obvious to say, but listen to the song, listen to it again maybe. And the order you do this is totally debatable, whether you leave the listening till last, whether you analyse the lyrics first, whether you watch the video straight away, whether you leave the video at all, whether you leave it to the end. Make those judgment calls based on the different songs. Come up, excuse me. Of course, focusing on particular linguistic aspects, and they will vary from song to song. Sometimes the grammar area will be a very strong one and be something that you can work on, and it'll be an enjoyable way or realistic or authentic way of looking at a grammar point. Or particular lexical items that come up in a particular song. Or the phonetic aspects. If we're talking anything to do with issues of connected speech or anything that comes up, really. Obviously, it's very good to spend some time with certain songs anyway on the theme that's there. Whether you do that before, based on the title, or after, the thematic issues offer a way of doing lots of follow-up activities, I believe, on songs. Or something like a dictogloss. So you listen to a song where the lyrics are quite obscure. I've picked, for example, if you know it, Kate Bush's Wuthering Heights. Write down what you hear. Write down any words that you hear and discuss with some partners. What's going on here? What words did you make out? What might the story be, if anything at all? And I think with follow-up activities, songs are particularly good for follow-up activities. Once again, just loads of things that you could do here that I'm sure you've got better ideas than I have. But you could listen to a song and then be forced within a certain number of words to reconstruct or explain what that song was about. That should be a bit challenging. So you need to pick, like writing an abstract for a university paper, you need to pick your words very carefully. You could write another verse. You could change a verse. You could change the outcome of the story, if there is a story in that particular song. If you haven't seen a video, you could do a kind of video storyboard. If you were making a video, what would it be? I don't know if your students would have anything more than that, if they were capable of actually filming it, but a theoretical look at that would involve quite a lot of discussion. If you've got a song that's very personal, as a lot of songs are, you could do something like ask the students to write a diary entry. What's the writer feeling? If they're having a lot of problems in the song, if it's one of those kind of songs, you could ask them to be an agony aunt or an agony uncle, and respond, what advice would you offer here? And obviously you might, structure the grammar, or scaffold the grammar to go with that. So I think the advice really is to mix it up. That's what I would say, and move away from this kind of the formulaic, okay, we've got a song, that's great, out comes the tip X, blank out some words, I think the last thing we want to do with such a really interesting text type is bore them or scare them off. Oh no, not another song, the teacher always does this or whatever. It's just definitely something to avoid. So this is just a random slide. Anyone got that one? That's where you take a break, isn't it? There's a couple of sites there, and some chap has got nothing better to do with his time than to do pie charts from the names of songs. So, anybody like to share that with anybody who doesn't know it? If there is anybody in the room that doesn't know it. What's the song? I would do anything for love in brackets. But I won't do that, whatever that is. We really don't know. We really don't know what Mr. Loaf, can we call him Mr. Loaf? What Mr. Loaf is talking about there. So, back to gap fill. Okay, yeah. So we heard about gap fill yesterday, didn't we, in the second plenary, and some ideas for kind of doing it differently and moving away from the formula. I think gap fill can work. Having sort of said, oh no, gap fill, oh no, tip-Xing out, etc., etc., I think it can work, but it needs thought. There's no doubt about that. And it could be actually more time-consuming rather than less. You might think, oh, gap fill is the least time-consuming. To do it well, it actually might be more time-consuming than other things. What could you do to make gap fill more successful with a song? Look at a bunch of, or chunk together a bunch of different vocabulary items. That would certainly work. As an input, and then look out for them, what might that be within that gap in the song. I've got an example later, you might be able to work it out from that might be to do with weather-related vocabulary. Any ideas? Or descriptive adjectives to describe what people are like. Of course, with gap fill, it's a very good idea, probably fairly standard practice to talk about, what kind of word would it be, what part of speech would it be positive or negative in connotation or whatever, would it be a verb, adjective, noun. And I think that really, if you're going to use gap fill with songs, it might be a better idea to focus on, as was mentioned in the plenary yesterday, collocations, or maybe part of the collocation, rather than just individual random words. Yeah? So I'm not totally against it, I just think it's a little bit problematic. We'll go back to Gapful in a minute, but once again, looking at some of the people that have got things to say on particular skills areas. Quite a lot of, I've got a slide at the end with quite a lot of theory. It's not mostly about theory today, but just on looking at grammar, there's a belief that songs can be used to help to reinforce grammar patterns. Also to do with pronunciation, very much the listening to songs and maybe mimicking them as well can help with practicing different intonation patterns. And there's different authors that talk of how to do fluency practice with the use of that. So there really is quite a lot, actually there's quite a lot out there, and obviously I've been looking at this for a while. To do with vocabulary, there's some interesting academic articles or semi-academic articles on helping with receptive and productive understanding of vocabulary and with aiding reading and literacy. And Maxim talks of the cultural understanding that you can glean from a song for the wider world. Oops. A very important area, of course, I think, is pronunciation and vocabulary work. So you've got dictation, and you see the example there. That's actually come from Mark Hancock. I slightly lifted that. The Beatles' Something, which might easily be understood as something in the way she moves attracts me like no other lover. I don't know if this is going to work or not. You never know with these.
I like Obama Self.
Yeah, Obama Self, yeah. That was, who was that by? Jamie Kelly. It does sound very similar to that, doesn't it? Got no idea what this is actually. Yeah.
I went to the moped store. And the salesman's like, what's your budget? And I'm like, honestly, I don't know nothing about mopeds. He said, all right.
Okay. So there's some funny stuff about that. So issues of connected speech cause these problems, don't they, or these things that are humorous. You know, elision, liaison, reduction, simulation, juncture, etc. One thing you could do, of course, is it's very popular nowadays, the lip-syncing battles. I was in ITEFL, Slovenia, and didn't have the guts, actually, to do it. But I figure next time there's one, I've got some ideas for what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. But I think it's just getting your mouth around words. I mean, students aren't going to want to, maybe, depending on the student, get up and sing, but maybe to get up and mouth, you know, particular words, hopefully when they know what they are, you know, could certainly work. And I suppose if you're mouthing a difficult word or a new word or a bunch of words said quickly together, you're kind of halfway there to doing what you actually have to do. Yeah, I mean, I gave an example also of sort of modern slang or common usage, which is a very interesting song by UK artist Lily Allen, LDN, which is text message language, obviously, for London. Yeah, that's very, very interesting, controversial kind of slang language, and a song that I would recommend, principally because you've got this kind of calypso beat, and this upbeat, really upbeat calypso sound to the song, and then you've got a very, very downbeat message of urban problems going on. So that's a very interesting example, I think. You've also got Wordle.com. Do you know of Wordle? Yes. So I suppose everyone knows it. If you're Java enabled on your computer, you can input the lyrics, copy and paste from whatever site. Does anyone know what song that is? Anyone clever enough to work it out? Oh, that didn't take long at all. Yeah, I suppose because the words are so heavily highlighted. Very good, yeah. So all sorts of things that I think you could do from that. Any suggestions how you could use something like that?
Pick 5 words and create a story.
Okay, good, nice, Jean. Any other suggestions? All sorts of things, really, couldn't you? You could just sort of, just put them into groups according to word types, put them into groups according to positive or negative connotation. All sorts of things. Yes, yeah, absolutely good. Yeah. Once again, these kind of things, improvisation, I don't know, you need to think about the song and what you're going to do beforehand. I think it's really the way to go. Lots of thematic work. You can do. I mean, this list could have been 1 million pages long and we'd have been here till Christmas 2020. But I've just highlighted some of the things that you could do thematically, or some songs that are not necessarily ones that I think are great, but ones that I think are great for themes. Okay? So going through there, they've all got kind of a narrative or a story or a backstory. So you've got Bobby Gentry's Ode to Billy Joe, which is a kind of a classic whodunit. What was going on? What was thrown off the Tallahatchie Bridge? Who done it and what did they do? Kind of mystery. You've got The Farm's All Together Now, which is kind of a rallying cry for peace. It's about the football game, which actually did happen, or there were football games. I know that because I'm a historian. In 1914. So that creates a wider context for afterwards. You've got The Verve, a band from the 90s that are worth checking out. They're the band that never made any money from ripping off the Jaggers and Richards sample. But in history, it's almost like written around Blake's London, Blake's poem, and a compare and contrast activity. So quite sort of highbrow or interbrow, does that exist? Or something like God Save the Queen, which is the Sex Pistols' reaction to the Silver Jubilee. I remember when the Diamond Jubilee was on at the university, I actually showed them this and I said, there's more to Britain than just everybody fawning about some head of state that nobody knows anything to do with, and showed them this. And I think that was quite interesting for them to see that people had other views about this. There's a kind of white hip-hop artist called Scroobius Pip who did a track called A Letter from God to Man, which is really, really interesting. A really thoughtful guy, even though he's from Essex. He's a very, very thoughtful chap. And it's actually what it is, actually. Rather than sort of this concept of us always blaming God for something, it's kind of a letter from a deity explaining to us that it's us that are responsible for all these problems and we should stop passing the buck onto something that may or may not exist, Then you've got a band called The, who are sort of from the 80s. Very, very interesting lyrically. This particular track is interesting because it's a kind of a searing indictment of Thatcher's Britain, which still holds true today. Kieran was briefly referring to that, I think, with the change in people's mentality. With the tagline, "This is the 51st state of the USA." Dolly Parton, 9 till 5. Outdated? Question mark. Great song. No question mark there. You've got tracks like Baz Luhrmann. This is actually from his film Romeo and Juliet, which is kind of the ultimate advice song. I think it was written originally by a psychologist and somebody read it out and Baz Luhrmann put music to it. Or something like more topical, maybe not so topical anymore. My daughter loved this and then she suddenly said, "Oh, I hate Frozen now." I'm like, well, that's good that I spent about £1,000 on stuff like that for you. But Let It Go is really, really interesting. I had some great debates with sort of teenagers and late teens about what it might mean, taking it way beyond what I'm sure what it was supposed to actually mean. So back to this again. My idea here is that maybe gap fill is a bit problematic. So I've deliberately done this. And taken out things. So the meaning is, I think you'll agree, unless you disagree with me, the meaning is almost entirely gone from this song. Something is rising. Right. According to our something, the something is the place to go. I suppose, on the funny side, you could play around with this and produce something totally humorous, something that fitted, which word type is this, what could it be, etc., etc. For those of you who are dying to see the original one, it goes like this. It's obviously quite challenging words to actually get correct, if that's what it's all about in the first place. Sort of camp disco classic, isn't it? Love it. Okay, so that's enough of my blah blah now, which leaves us enough time to do what we're going to do. So what I'd like to do is divide you into 8 groups. I've no idea how I'm going to do that. And at least one person, I'm sure more of you than one will have, needs a Wi-Fi enabled phone. Okay, because you probably won't know the song and it'd be a good idea to listen to it. So how can we do this? Probably about 4 groups each side. Do you want to sort yourself into roughly 4 groups of 4 or 5, or however many that might be?